Hello, my name's Harry. You're watching 20 Questions with. Today we're talking to Cyanide. Cyanide, first off, would you like to give us a little bit of information about yourself?
Well, I'm a 26-year-old PhD student. I I got interested in pharmacology and neuropharmacology pretty early on, from around age 14, and that led to my experimentation with various recreational drugs, which I believe is why you're interviewing me. Um, so yeah, I guess, yeah.
Let's start with a little background on your childhood and what that was like.
All right. Yeah, my childhood was fairly normal. I mean, I lived a pretty sheltered life. I was born to Indian immigrants in the United States. I was really kind of brought up to almost brought up in a way that would my parents really wanted me to go into the sciences, essentially. And there was a bit of pressure for me to become an engineer or something, the typical type of stuff you hear about, you know in, the children of Indian immigrants in the United States. um, I didn't I I didn't really get into drugs until maybe age 14, um, when I started smoking cannabis, and that was primarily my primary motivator for that was, I was diagnosed with depression, very severe depression, at around age 13. So I mean, from age 14 onwards, I essentially experimented with various different types of drugs. Um, my primary motivation was to treat my treatment-resistant depression.
What's the craziest or most intense drug you've taken so far?
Um, let's see. The craziest drug. Um, probably Probably there's a drug called U47700. We called it UZIP because it's like a zip code, like U and followed by a zip code. And it's an opioid. The reason I say it's crazy is because this stuff, we used to smoke it, but this stuff would kind of melt into this viscous brown liquid that stunk and would stick everywhere. And I mean, and the withdrawals from it was intense. Uh, so I guess it would probably be U47700. But if you're talking about like crazy, as in like like a crazy experience, it would probably be something like FLAD, which is an analog of LSD. Which when I take FLAD, or when I took FLAD, I get this complete dissolution of my ego, and I mean, purples especially are really intense. Um, and I get all kinds of weird thoughts, like I sometimes feel like I've changed genders or something like that. It was really weird. I mean, um, I basically thought or felt like I was a woman for a good amount of time on FLAD. I don't know why or what really triggered it, but it's an interesting experience because, yeah, yeah.
So the first time that you ever tried a drug, you said it was when you were around 13, 14?
Yeah, I think I consider alcohol a drug too. So, when I was 13, I had my first drink. Um, my first experience with you know, actual illicit drugs was probably at 14 with, cannabis, like most people.
You consider alcohol a drug?
Yes, very much so. I mean, I know that pharmacologically, it's well, it has very dirty pharmacology, but it's a GABA A positive allosteric modulator, just like benzodiazepines, and it's an NMDA antagonist, like ketamine as well. Um, so I do consider it a psychoactive drug or a drug.
What was your first experience like?
With alcohol.
Yeah, alcohol, drugs, everything.
Yeah, my first experience with alcohol was actually not that pleasant. I had a friend who was really into like B&E stuff, breaking and entering. He was essentially a thief, a professional thief. And one time I went along with him, and we got into some random house, and basically there was vodka there, and that was my first drink. So um, yeah, and it wasn't really a positive experience. I got really hungover. For some reason, I had a headache almost immediately after drinking, so that kind of turned me off to alcohol. And I mean, to this date, I don't really like alcohol that much. Um, yeah, but my first experience with cannabis was a bit more positive. Um, so essentially, there were some older kids, and I had a friend, and we smoked some cannabis out of a pipe made out. It was probably the nastiest pipe you've seen. It was just like a socket wrench socket in a plastic bottle with like plastic tubing coming out of it. It was not the best, not the healthiest way to consume cannabis, but I enjoyed it. I found that it really helped with my depression, particularly. It helped me eat, and helped me get sleep. So that kind of started my fascination with cannabis. Yeah.
Did you go along with the breaking and entering because these were the only friends you had?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really into, theft and that kind of stuff, but this one friend I had he was obsessed with it. He was obsessed with shoplifting and all of this stuff. And he was really at that time the only real friend I had at middle school. This was in middle school, so late middle school. So yeah.
You devoted your life to studying drugs at the age of 18. Can you say a little bit about that, please?
Um, so when I first entered university, I was a bioengineering major, largely kind of to please my parents, almost. But I quickly found that the coursework I really wasn't a good fit for engineering. I didn't really have an engineer's mind. Um, and even before I was 18, I was really quite interested in consciousness and how psychedelics affect consciousness. I mean, I wrote a pretty lengthy report on how psychedelics can be used medicinally when I think I was 16 at the time. Um, and so at eight at 18, at 18, I dropped out of my bioengineering major. And then actually, I would say at 19 is when things really changed, because that was the year I had an opioid overdose, and I overdosed on butyfentanyl, which is an analog of fentanyl, and that really got me interested um, in understanding why opioids are so deadly, and also how it might be possible to design better opioids that don't suppress respiration. So that's how I got started in actual drug research. I mean, I started working in a lab that dealt with opioid receptor pharmacology. So, yeah.
How many different drugs have you tried so far?
How many different drugs? Oh, I used to have a list somewhere, but I think it would probably be around 30 or 40 different drugs. And I mean, there are drugs in the same family, but I've tried different analogs of those drugs, and that's why that number adds up.
So, are you not worried about having health issues or developing an addiction as a result of your drug use?
Um, yeah, I mean, addiction has been a concern of mine, especially recently. But but I think what really overpowers my fears is the curiosity I have for different types of drug experiences. And as far as my health goes, I have been suicidal or just very depressed most of my life, and I honestly never really gave much thought to just living a long life. I mean, I always expected I would die kind of young, so um, I guess that's part of the answer there.
You moved to a new city last year and have made unorthodox attempts at making new friends, including offering people ketamine and crystal meth for free. Can you say a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, so I moved up to Canada, and that's where I'm a PhD student. Um, and I guess the because of the way I'm so interested in drugs, and I'm so wrapped up in the world of drugs that I feel like one of the only real ways that I can really connect with people is to use drugs with them, and what better way to use drugs with people than to offer them some drugs for free. Um, so that's part of the explanation behind that. I mean, it really didn't work that way. It didn't really work very well. Um, but yeah, that's kind of the explanation behind that.
Why didn't it work very well?
Um, so most found that a lot of people will just they'll just take the drugs, and they'll leave. They won't stick around or do them with you. Um, and that kind of bummed me out, that people didn't really want to hang out with me and experience those drugs. Um, so
Are there any drugs you've taken so far where it's been an enjoyable experience and caused you to think about not being so enthusiastic about drugs?
um, yes, actually. So I this was actually quite recent. At one point, I was using meth actually quite almost daily. And what happened was one night I had stayed up all night on meth. And in the morning, I'd made this very stupid decision to take some LSD and mushrooms. Now, now that that definitely led to kind of like a bad or a negative trip. But what that also did was it kind of totally turned me off from meth. Like I haven't used meth since. Um, so I guess it was kind of like the silver lining in that really negative bad trip that kind of turned me off from meth.
Before the trip, I have to ask, I've been watching a lot of Breaking Bad recently. What's meth like? Sorry, I have to.
Um, so I used to primarily smoke the meth. And when you smoke meth, it hits you very quickly and almost all at once, and you get this extraordinary kind of rush feeling that kind of makes you want to move around and move your legs around, just move around a lot, and there's this intense euphoria that comes along with it. That's kind of it's almost like a forced euphoria. Um, so and at higher doses, people tend to, I mean, people, even me myself, people tend to get paranoid from it. But it's basically it's the euphoria is, I wouldn't say it's identical to cocaine, but it's similar to cocaine. It's just more intense and more forced.
You're currently studying drug abuse as a PhD student in neuroscience. Can you say a
Right.
little bit about that, please, sir?
Yeah. Well. So after my overdose, which I spoke about earlier, I decided to switch majors and go into neuroscience. Because I wanted to understand how opioids work, how drugs work. And I was really interested in the pharmacology of drugs. So I got my bachelor's in neuroscience, and I did my master's in, I mean, technically it's a medical science, but it was in a neuroscience lab. Now, currently, I'm doing my PhD, and my PhD research involves the influence of a particular cytokine called TNF alpha in scaling glutamate receptors. So glutamate is the primary excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain, and there are three types of ion channels that glutamate binds to. Um, but in any case, TNF alpha seems to mediate the trafficking of these receptors, particularly in instances of activity blockade, but also in cocaine abuse, and also potentially other drugs. I mean, the other drugs we're looking at are morphine. I mean, I think morphine's the other drug we're looking at. That's essentially the background of my PhD research, or what my lab does. My research in particular is looking at a particular subset of interneurons, which are typically interneurons are neurons that kind of connect principal neurons. Principal neurons being, like your main processing units in the brain. But my research is essentially studying the effects of TNF alpha on these interneurons and on the excitatory receptor expression in these neurons.
So does the drug use not interfere with that, or do you find that it helps your studies?
It's so I've had some close calls, like I said, especially with meth. I found that initially I started taking it to increase my productivity, and eventually it ended up decreasing my productivity. Um, but I find that if I maintain my drug use carefully, and I use, only on the weekends, and kind of trying to, restrict the types of drugs I use. That typically helps, and it kind of lessens the impact of my studies. So I do apply some harm reduction practices, but yeah, I can certainly see how it might affect my research.
Do you see a counselor?
Um, yeah, well, at the moment, I'm in between counselors or therapists, but I did see a counselor for a long time. It's kind of difficult because I'm an international student here, and the system in this country is a little different for visiting a therapist. Um, but yeah, I have seen a counselor, and I plan to actually go back as well.
Do your friends and family know about your passion for drugs?
Um, so I think I think most of my friends are well aware of it, because I'll post about it on on social media. I've posted syntheses for various drugs, not illicit drugs, but kind of legal analog drugs on my social media. So my friends are aware of it. My family, they know that I'm very interested in drugs, but they kind of have a negative perception of that. They see it more of as kind of like an addiction thing. So yeah.
Are there any drugs that you wouldn't take, and if so, why?
Um, I probably wouldn't take any of the deliriants, like datura. Diphenhydramine is often referred to as a deliriant. Diphenhydramine is Benadryl. Um, I it's just that I don't see the experience being very pleasant for deliriants. It's just there's a lot of confusion, there's memory loss, and there are a lot of somatic side effects. But other than that, I think I would try just about every drug, and any drug. Um, well, okay, deliriants and maybe inhalants as well, because I mean I have huffed ether before, but I wouldn't try to um, try to inhale like hairspray or anything.
So your main go-tos, needles, pills. How are you getting your, like, how are you taking it in?
Um, so taking what in? Just
So, like, you said that obviously mainly on the weekend. So you know, I'm thinking Saturday night, you're sat in, you want something. What's your go-to?
what's my go-to? Okay, it is LSD or psilocybin. Um, uh, because primary one reason is because I still have active major depressive disorder. Like I'm still kind of in an episode, and I'm trying to treat my depression that way, and it does kind of work to an extent. Um, um, but yeah, so that would probably be my go-to drug on a Saturday. Um, I mean, I'm open to all sorts of drugs, but I mean, psychedelics are really close to my heart. Um, so
So, for someone that's never taken psilocybin, can you describe that experience for me, please?
yeah, sure. So I think a part. So when I take psilocybin, I don't tend to get a whole lot of visual effects. I know a lot of people do get very strong visuals, um, but I think the most visual effects I get are kind of like the breathing of surfaces, um, and seeing some patterns when you close your eyes. Those are the kind of the visual effects, but I think the main effect of psilocybin is that it loosens associations between various concepts in your mind. So it tends to promote a state of kind of freer thinking, and there's a feeling of kind of there was a researcher from the UK, he's still alive, by the name of Carhart Harris, Robin Carhart Harris. And I believe he used the term oceanic boundlessness to describe part of the psilocybin experience. And that kind of refers to this kind of this feeling of vastness that kind of opens up in your mind, where almost anything is possible, or it's just a feeling of freedom, of being freed from the normal constraints that your mind puts on you in order to maintain consciousness, which is important, but a lot of times these kind of rigid processes can restrict our thinking and our perspective, which is part of the reason why psilocybin is potentially a treatment for depression as well.
Interesting. Can you ever foresee a time where you'll stop taking drugs and focus solely on studying them?
I honestly, I can't at the moment. I mean, I think my perspective will change eventually, but in the current state I am, which is kind of in a moderate depressive episode, I kind of feel like I will be using drugs till I die, and I'll probably die of a drug overdose or something like that, even though I do apply harm reduction measures. I feel like it's kind of inevitable.
How do you apply these measures?
So I always, I test my drugs before I ingest them, and I always use a scale to weigh out doses, unless it's, if it's something like LSD, which you can't really weigh out on a regular scale, then that's different. And I try to avoid redosing, because I find that redosing, especially on stimulants or drugs like MDMA, redosing just increases the negative effects and doesn't contribute to the positive effects. So
what's your view on the drug legalization debate?
I am a very strong advocate for drug legalization, primarily because I've seen people who have had kind of their lives ruined by the criminal, by the effects of the legal system on their livelihoods, I'm in favor of full legalization, not just decriminalization, because in addition to this negative impact I'm seeing on a lot of a lot of my friends by the legal system because they either use drugs or they might sell drugs. Um, another major problem with just just decriminalizing drugs is that where is the safe supply going to come from? I mean, there has to be a way that we must regulate and make sure that the drugs that people are getting are in fact the drugs that they want to take. So I feel like there needs to be more regulation in the drug trade. Um, Particularly in light of this crisis we have with fentanyl in North America. So, yeah.
We've previously had a psychedelic on our channel who administers therapy to people under the influence of psychedelics. What's your opinion on that?
I think that's really a step in the right direction because, well, it is because I mean, just speaking personally from my experience with therapy and just normal, regular, conventional therapy, it is extraordinarily slow, and it takes a really long time to really kick in and start working. The thing that psychedelics do is they dramatically increase synaptic plasticity, or your synaptic plasticity is kind of the neuroscience term for learning, I guess. But psychedelic assisted therapy is definitely, I feel that it's kind of the future of therapy because by inducing these states of increased plasticity, you're able to administer the therapy, the talk therapy, in a way that leaves a more lasting impact on the brain. So, yeah.
What do you think the future holds for you?
Um, I, uh, that's a hard question. I think, um, I think if I do end up getting getting through this PhD, I will most likely go and try to get do my postdoc somewhere, um, and I hope to become a researcher. Um, I'm thinking if I do my postdoc, it would probably be in academia, but if I don't do my postdoc, it would be in the industry. But I really want to get into developing drugs for psychiatric disorders because I feel like our pharmacology to treat psychiatric disorders is so limited, and it's also not very specific. Um, so, yeah.
What advice would you give to others who are considering going the same path that you did in regards to drugs?
Um, so I made a lot of mistakes early on that really I shouldn't have made. Um, I think the most important piece of advice I would give is to really, really emphasize harm reduction measures. Um, even with psychedelics, which are relatively, fairly safe drugs for the most part, it's important to make sure that you're in a setting and in an environment that is really conducive to you, I guess having a good time would be, and having a good time and being safe. So I would really kind of, I would discourage people from. I know that a lot of people say that, you know, taking psychedelics and going out into nature or going for a walk or something is really great. But in my personal experience, um, using psychedelics, it's something I have to do indoors and, you know, alone usually. Just so my behavior doesn't get so disinhibited and I do something stupid. And I've done a lot of stupid things on psychedelics. And another harm reduction measure would be to definitely get a scale of some kind. It's not a good idea to eyeball drugs, especially when you get into really potent ones. Even something like methamphetamine, which I'm sure a lot of people eyeball their meth doses. I think that you should really ideally be weighing out the dose of drug you take. Um, so, and I mean, I guess the other thing is to, you know, whenever you can, test your drugs, because they're not always going to be what they are advertised as. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, Cyanide, our time is up. I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to chat with me today. And I really hope you take care of yourself.
Yep.
Especially in regards to the therapy. I know how hard depression is. I understand. So please genuinely take care of yourself. And if you feel like you need it, please don't be afraid to reach out. The same goes for everyone else in the comments as well. Anyone that watches, before you write anything today, before you write anything in the comments, just take a second and think about what you're going to say, because it can go a really long way. Thank you so much. All the links that you need are down below. And I appreciate you. Thank you very much.